Hello dear students, I'm sorry I couldn't come for 2 days, still not well, but let's begin with some of the units which we'll be talking about apart from the thinker. In your paper 1, apart from the thinkers and the unit 2, one of the most important units is a social stratification, unit 5. So we'll be talking about let me say that when we will be talking about the social stratification, I request all of you that once you have done the social stratification, you also try to look at the second paper, bring about your knowledge of the caste system in India, so that you would be able to understand that how the certain theoretical perspective which you have used here in paper 1, that could be used in a paper 2 as well. When we are looking at the syllabus, it begins with the concepts. In which equality, inequality, hierarchy, stratification, sometimes you find about the question on unstratified society, poverty and exclusion. So these are the concepts. Then they will finding about theories of social stratification, in which you will be finding about the first, that is called a structural functionalist, or functionalist analysis, in which the two scholars Davis and Moore. But when you talk about the Davis and Moore, you also need to talk about whether it is mentioned or not. Somehow or other, automatically you will have to talk about Melvin Tumin as a critic. And then Marxist perspective, Weberian perspective, the Trinity model we will have to talk about, and do keep an eye for some time on the contemporary one. So, apart from this, you will have to talk about the dimensions. Not very important, because they will be talking about in some other units as well, and the dimensions will be there in terms of race and ethnicity, class and caste. This we will have to talk about, a status group and agenda. And then, in the same one, you try to link stratification and mobility, that is social mobility. And in this, You just try to look at the debate in terms of open versus close. You talk about it in terms of the caste. There could be dimensions in a Sanskritization. So that way, the moment you are talking about the mobility, you also need to talk about the perspective of mobility in the Indian context, from the orthogenetic coming from within and heterogenetic coming from outside. But let's begin this unit with this sentence of mine, that right since the emergence of sociology as a discipline, which emerged as a study of urban industrial society, the social strata which have emerged out in a society, the social changes which have emerged out due to the transition from pre-modern to the modern society, since then till now, social stratification remains to be one of the major themes in the sociological analysis. Almost everywhere. When we are studying the industrial society, when we are studying the modern complex society, you find about that how people have been put into the layers. And thus, one of the most analytical units in a sociological inquiry has been the social stratification. It is a system in a very simple one. It is a system by which the group of people are divided into layers on the basis of the relative power, privilege, prestige, wealth, and so on. It is basically a system of ranked statuses by which the members of society are placed into higher or lower stratum, implying that social stratification is a way to rank a large number of people in a hierarchy, manifesting relative privileges, power, wealth, those social parameters which society considered to be worth. But in this whole process, when we are talking about ranking the people one above the another, or when ranking the group of people one above the another, on the basis of certain socially desired worth, that could also include the inborn quality, that would be the material possession, performance, achievement, which society considers desirable. And if on the basis of it, the group of people are hierarchically arranged one above the another, then the very perspective of social stratification comes into picture. And now, when you say group of people on the basis of the relative power, prestige, privileges, wealth, inborn quality, achievement, material possession, they are ranked one above the other in hierarchy, then somewhere in this entire ranking of the group of people, we find about the notion that is basically inequality. And thus, conceptually in one line, what is social stratification? Social stratification is institutionalized, structural inequality. Remember this in a one line, that social stratification is institutionalized structural inequality. The inequality which is socially created. Mind the line. The inequality which is socially created on the basis of the same social parameters. When the group of people have been ranked one above the another in hierarchy, then social stratification is a form of social inequality. When I say social stratification is a form of social inequality, then you now bring the debate in terms of the equality versus inequality. Now up to here, when we say institutionalized structural inequality, we have differentiated people on the social divisions. And now once we have differentiated people on the social division, the notion of inequality seems to be inherent into it. And this differentiation, you will be finding about it runs throughout the human society, in which at least two categories, in which one group of people is always positioned better than the another. Thus the example of the social divisions, if we are talking about, when you are differentiating people, could be race, ethnicity, class, caste and gender. Now look at this dimension. The point is, when you are developing your concept in a unit 5 to 10 and also in the second paper, it should be holistic. It should be not so that you are talking about equality, then we are talking about inequality, you are talking about poverty, you are talking about exclusion. No, try to provide the locations to the concepts in your own understanding. The broadly, when you said about that social stratification is an institutionalized structural inequality, then in this institutionalized structural inequality, we are basically referring or looking at the social differentiation, in which one group seems to be better privileged than the another. Thus, if I could quote Jeff Pine, then the examples of social stratification could be race, ethnicity, caste, class and gender. However, when we are looking at the entire human history, everywhere people have professed one utopia. I am sorry to use this word. People have always professed one utopia, that people should be equal. And if the people should be equal, then either the equality of persons, either the equality of opportunities, or the equality of conditions, equality of outcome, this has always been desired by the human society. And almost in every phase, even today when we are looking at the modern society, we have been talking about the concept of equality. Though when we look at the democracy, we are more concerned of the equal opportunity, equality of opportunities. But imagining that everyone should be equal, and thus either in terms of the person's opportunities, the conditions or outcome, that way equality has been talked about. If I could quote David's speech, he said the demand of equality is the demand of right man at the right place. But remember two lines there. I was talking about the David's speech, that right man at the right place. But remember two lines there. Equality does not mean sameness. And if equality does not mean sameness, then equality also does not mean end of difference. So in an egalitarian society where every roles are equal, people should be equal, but they should also be different. And that difference can be looked in terms of birth, in terms of the material position, power, privileges and so on. Though particularly when you look at the certain writings in the hunting gathering society, the forest society, and more precisely from the writings of the anthropologists who had been concerned of the study of simpler society, they have basically depicted hunting and gathering society where the social economic roles are not differentiated. When you say socio-economic roles are not differentiated, then such hunting gathering society will basically refer to as egalitarian society. It was proposed that all adult males are engaged in hunting. All adult females are engaged in a gathering. The differentiation has not emerged out. This is the perfect example of egalitarian society. But even in such societies, the very idea of desired man or woman has always been there. Someone could be a better hunter, someone could be a more fortunate gatherer, better gatherer. So the idea of desired man and woman also persisted in such societies. And on the basis of the desire of whosoever come closer to that ideal, they enjoyed more privilege, they enjoy more respect or esteem. That way, certain perspective of differentiation was found. But when you also need to look at, when you say all the adults are indulged in hunting, all the adults are indulged, all the adult females are indulged in gathering, then there has also been an age grade system between the children and the adult. And adults, in comparison to the children, they seem to be more privileged. And thus, some sort of differentiation has always been found over there. Either on the basis of the age grade system, or either on the basis of the ideal of the desired man or woman. And thus, when we are looking at this hunting gathering society, which are considered to be egalitarian society, we find about that some sort of inequality was also witnessed in this hunting gathering society. But this inequality has not been institutionalized. For example, when you look at the age grade system, the child who was deprived of when compared to the adult, when he becomes adult, he will enjoy all the privileges which he was denied as a child. It means the two lines you try to remember. That the society where inequality has not been institutionalized, I repeat, the society where inequality has not been institutionalized is unstratified society. But the societies where inequality has been institutionalized, they are a stratified society. So sometimes they ask you, what do you mean by unstratified society? So inequality has been there in all the societies. But this inequality has been institutionalized or not institutionalized. That conceptual debate you have to raise in terms of making the difference between unstratified and stratified society. People could also be differentiated here on the basis of height, weight, color, sex. However, sociologically speaking, the differences based on height and weight is not sociologically important. But the moment we look at the two other, that is sex and a color, there seems to be more sociological significant, because on the basis of which we have found that how not only the differentiation between the group of people have been done, but the group of people, those who have been differentiated, they have been also ranked one above another in a society. And thus, throughout human history, the practice of racism and sexism has been a reality. But do remember that when we are talking about on the basis of sex and a gender, inequality has been there, differentiation has been there. Then in the same sequence, now you come to the natural versus social inequality. How the natural inequality gets built into the social one, such kind of conceptual questions when it comes out. So this is the sequence of your understanding in a concepts. We started with social stratification, we come to the institutionalized structural inequality, in which we raise the debate on terms of equality versus inequality. And we talked about that how inequality which is not institutionalized is an unstratified society. The inequality which has been institutionalized in society is a stratified society. That way the differences have come out. And then we raise, are there some other perspective, are there some other parameters on which the people are differentiated apart from the caste, race? Yes, the basis of differentiation has been there in terms of height and weight, but they are not sociologically significant. But the two differentiation on the basis of sex and color seems to be sociologically very significant, because on the basis of this we have found not only the differentiating between a group of people, not only the ranking one above the another, but the certain social meaning has been attributed. And that way the practice of racism and sexism are witnessed in a society. Though the sex and color, they are the biological, natural differences. But if I quote Andhra Beti, that natural differences will remain to be difference unless and until society has attributed a meaning into it. It means the natural inequality is now getting the social legitimacy through the social meaning what the society has attributed behind it. The moment you say the whites are more clever than the blacks, men are more powerful than female, we are not providing the social legitimacy. The meaning is socially legitimatized in this natural inequality. Still not feeling well. The moment these social meanings are attributed, the very difference which is based on nature, which is based on biology, its connotation completely changes. And if on the basis of this socially attached meaning, the people of the group of people are ranked one above the another, then the perspective of social stratification comes into picture. And thus, natural inequality gets built into the social inequality, giving way to stratification. But stratification which is socially created inequality. And when I say that right since the inception of sociology, social stratification has one of the important themes. Then over the decades, the sociologists who turned their attention to the study of social stratification, they also developed the certain kind of theoretical perspectives to analyze social stratification, in which either the functionalist, Marxist, Weberian perspective, this seems to be the most important one. And you know that when we are talking about the sociology of social stratification, the two magnum opuses would be the Marxian and Weberian analysis. But since a structural functionalism or functionist analysis of social stratification has been there, then in the earlier from where we find about the development of theoretical methodological model, the functionalist versus conflict, there would be the two opposite streams, the theoretical streams within which the certain sociological propositions of the thinkers will start emerging out. So if I give you some lines that you find about that how functionalists have reacted to the conflict theorists, how the conflict perspective has reacted to the functionalist one. Then if I give certain propositions on which this difference between functionalist and conflict perspective could be done, then the functionalists argue that social stratification is universal, inevitable and necessary for society. Just opposite of this, the conflict theorists, they say that social stratification may be universal, but not inevitable, not necessary. And if the functionalists say that social stratification facilitates optimum functioning of society, then the conflict perspective says that it impedes the optimal functioning of society. If the functionalists are saying that social stratification creates social system, then just opposite, the functionalists are saying that social system creates social stratification. The functionalists are saying social system creates social stratification. What the conflicts are saying, social stratification creates social system. If the functionalists are saying that stratification is an expression of shared value of society, then the conflicts are saying that it is basically an expression of dominant group of society. If the functionalists are saying rewards and tasks are distributed equally, then the conflict perspective is saying that tasks and rewards are not distributed equally, rather they are distributed unequally. So that way the difference between functionalist and conflict perspective has come. Now you know that when sociology emerged right from Kant to Spencer to Durkheim, and later on in the writings of Talcott, Parsons, Martin, the functionalist, structural functionalist approach seems to be the most important one. The English word function has come from the Latin fungi with the verb functum, that is to serve a purpose. I have told you that one in terms of the theoretical models, theoretical strands. It means functionalism, which is basically looking at that how it is serving a purpose. Then mind my line here, that if social stratification is an institutionalized structural inequality, then this inequality must be functional for the society. Do I need to say anything now for Davis and Moore? Do I need to say anything in terms of Talcott, Parsons? So many questions have been there in terms of Davis and Moore. Sometimes they have asked you the Melvin Tumin as a critic. Now when you say if social stratification is an institutionalized structural inequality, then this inequality must be functional for the society. Now look at, thinkers are gone. The proposition is understood, the conceptual understanding is here. And now you have got a direction to look at all the thinkers. Thinkers are not to be viewed as a monster. Thinkers are to be viewed as a man, as we are, as a human being. Only perspective is that time scale has changed. Their time was something different. Our time is something different. So if inequality is there, inequality must be functional. And this must be functional for the society as a whole. So if inequality is evident in a society in terms of the social stratification, it must have a certain purpose. And in this very perspective, the first account I said, that account of Talcott Parsons seems to be significant one. prominent sociologist in the mid-20th century, who say that it has widely been recognized in the sociological field that social stratification is a generalized aspect of all social systems. It is a recognized fact that social stratification is a generalized aspect of social system, and it is linked to the type of integration of society. Order, stability, cooperation in society are based on value consensus. That is, a general agreement between the average members of society concerned with what is worth and desirable, what is worth and a right. The system of stratification is now derived from this value consensus, where the members of society are valued equally, and consequently on the basis of that evaluation they are placed in a ranked order of society. But for this, all members must be subjected to evaluation, and all roles are valued equally, and therefore there must be an integration of a structure of component units to constitute a common value system. For the stability of the system as a whole, whoever performs the value successfully would be evaluated accordingly and would be rewarded accordingly. The values may differ from society to society, and if the values differ from society to society from time to time, so would differ the ways of achieving positions in society, the ways of ranking the people one above the another in society. Let me give you the two examples. The 6 Indians, the American one, where the bravery is the greatest value. There seems to be, or there has been, a value consensus in this bravery. Whosoever the member of society has performed this value, bravery, more successfully than other, would be evaluated accordingly and will be rewarded. He will be given a seat in the tribal council whose seats are few and far. With every seat comes a certain power, certain privileges, and that way the ranking of one above the another, that could be found. When you look at the modern society, the Parsons is talking about the modern society, and that in terms of, in reference to the American society. Those who have been found to be productive in the economic system are rewarded highly, which ultimately creates a rank order in the society. Those who have made it by being productive in the economic system, and thus the ranking in a society would be done. Though there may be certain kind of arrogance in a part of the winners, and there may be certain kind of resentment in part of the losers, but it would not lead to conflict. Since all have been evaluated accordingly on the basis of the same value. It is not so that values, the evaluation of values have changed. Evaluation of value there was in terms of the bravery in the 6 Indians, those who have been found productive in the economic system. So the value system has been, the value consensus have been there, and all have been evaluated accordingly, equally. Those who have found to perform it more successfully than others has been rewarded, and that way the ranking has emerged out. And since all have been evaluated on the basis of a same value, conflict would not emerge out. And thus Parsons says that social stratification is functional, justifiable, inevitable, and necessary for the functioning of society. Apart from Parsons, one of the most important works in a functionist or structural functionist perspective has been by Kingsley Davis and Wilbur T. Moore. Some principles of stratification in 1945, in which the views of Davis and Moore comes out. And there they propose that social stratification is universal, existing in all known human society, and thus they begin their article with this proposition that all social systems have some certain functional prerequisites, and these functional prerequisites are considered necessary for the effective functioning of society. One such functional prerequisite is effective role allocation and performance. I repeat, one such significant or important functional prerequisite is effective role allocation and performance. It means if the system has to survive, all roles are to be filled by those who are best suited to perform it. Necessary training should be imparted, and the roles must be performed consciously. In other words, society must ascertain that all positions are filled. Number one. Number two, some positions are more important than others. Most important positions are filled by the most qualified person. Isn't that the question coming from here? And number four, to motivate the people, society must offer higher rewards. The further says, a job is highly rewarding according to the degree of importance. If the job is highly rewarding according to the degree of importance, then this job also requires training and talent. Though it may not be true in the non-competitive society, but in general, most of the important positions are filled with competition. It means people compete with one another to gain rewards, including social recognition, prestige, but money seems to be the most important. It means unequal pay is required to get the positions we filled by the most qualified ones. And how it is ensured? This is ensured through the system of social stratification. It means social stratification is unconsciously evolved device which ensures that the most talented one is matched with the most important position of society. I hope you would be now able to do all the questions from there. But to say most important positions are filled by the most talented one, the most qualified one, it also implies that some positions are important than others. It means positions differ in terms of their importance. The social positions will be differing in terms of their importance. And the people also differ in terms of their innate ability. So when the people differ in terms of the innate ability, the positions differ in terms of the degree of importance, then social stratification would basically be ensuring that the most talented one is matched with the most important position of the society, which is done by this stratification. The important positions require training, for which few are available. And those who have gone under training, they have incurred the loss of income. And this loss of income is basically a sacrifice made by those who have gone through the training, who have undertaken that training for that important position. Thus, once this training is over, then society must reward them. They must be compensated. And this would be a source of motivation to the people who are competing with one another. The people who differ in terms of their innate ability, the positions would also differ in terms of their importance. And they give the two propositions, that how the positions of the society differ. Number one, by the degree to which some positions are more important than other. It means when you are looking at the factory system, the positions of managers are more important than the workers. And number two, by the degree to which there is no alternative to it. For example, the position of a doctor. And thus they consider certification to be universal, inevitable and functional. However, I said that when we are talking about whether it has been implied or not, but very rarely it has taken place in a sociological discourse that every work or any work, word by word, line by line, proposition by proposition, has been critically evaluated. So when I talk about Davis and Moore, automatically Melvin M. Tumin will emerge as a critic to Davis and Moore. Tumin critically introspects Davis and Moore's propositions, and that propositions on a stratification. He does not believe that it is unconsciously evolved. Rather, he says that social stratification is consciously created by the society. Society is yet to find a device on the basis of which the importance of positions could be measured. How would be measuring the importance of positions? If you say about the doctor's position is more important, then you should not forget that the position of a garbage collector seems to be as important that of the position of a doctor. The position of garbage collector seems to be as necessary. And if you talk about the factory system, then the workforce of the laborers, the workers, is as inevitable, as necessary as that of the managers. What the society has done? Society has consciously created that this position seems to be more important than the other. And when you say that most talented one is matched with the most important position of the society, then Tumin has a certain objection. That when you make such a sweeping generalization, then the entire range of talent which is available in society, has that been pulled? Has that been found? Once you make the sentence that most talented one is matched with the most important position, the entire pool of talent, has that been found? It is true, dear, that the range of talent will always be more. And the importance of positions socially created, that also depends on the center of training, channel of recruitment. They also play an important role when you say that some positions are more important than others. Those who have undergone training, they have incurred loss of income. And that loss of income is basically sacrifice made by the person Once the training is over, he must be compensated. And this compensation is basically a reward, a motivation for the person. Agree. But if the person who has undertaken a training, loss of income has taken place. But this loss of income could be compensated in a few years of service. And what about this prestige, power which comes along with this one? If the money is the most important one, and in that way you are evaluating the loss of income, so that could be compensated in, for example, in 10 years or 15 years. Why to pay them the rest of their life? All right? And when you say social stratification is worth, it motivates people, then social stratification also demotivates one. AMA, American Medical Association, where we have found about that how hierarchy is blocked. The young talented doctors are not finding to move up. And in the non-competitive society, where on the basis of inborn quality people have been ranked one above another, hierarchy has been created, inequality is being practiced, the talent is wasted. And also when we are looking at in general the human society and comparing man with the woman, then the demotivation that comes out. And thus Melvin and Tumin, word by word, proposition by proposition, critical introspects the social stratification theory of Davis and Moore. And when we have talked about the Melvin Tumin, sometimes either in terms of the critique this question would be there, sometimes they have asked with the only Melvin Tumin as a critique of Davis and Moore. But once again I am saying, apart from the functionist or structural functionist perspective, the two most important work in the analysis of social stratification has been by Karl Marx and Max Weber. I always say that the work of Karl Marx is the locus classicus who try to view it from the conflict perspective. The root cause of social inequality is conflict. Or root cause of conflict is social inequality. We are talking about how social stratification is there, and if social inequality is there, inequality must be functional. That way the functionist perspective was picked up by us. But we will say, what is the root cause of conflict? This very social inequality is the root cause of conflict. And it's not only the root cause, it is the fundamental source. Social inequality is the fundamental source of conflict in the human history. And thus, do you remember that line? Human history is hitherto the history of a class struggle. In every phase of the social development, except the primitive communism, in the Marxian theory we talked about, primitive communism, ancient society, feudal society, capitalist society. So in every phase of social development, there has been coexistence of two contradictory classes, the oppressor and the oppressed, ruler and the ruled. And thus, to Marx, class is the base of social stratification. And try to define here the class. Class as a group of people who stand in a common relationship to the modes of production, in which they would gain their livelihood. Common positions in the modes of production. It means the division of society into classes in a Marxian theory is caused by the objective human differentiation. And all conflict arise in relation to economic realm, that is unequal distribution in the system of production. The development of social class to Marx is a single factor, or is based on, dependent on the single factor, that is means of production, by which people will gain their livelihood, which will include tools, factories, land, capital to produce wealth. And that's why once again I am saying that in a Marxian theory, class is the base of stratification. In every stratified society, two groups have been there, ruler and the ruled, oppressor and the oppressed. So in ancient society we find about slaves and the masters. In a feudal society we find about serfs and the lords. In a capitalist society we will be finding about the bourgeois and the proletariat. Their interests are different from one another. There is a contradiction between these classes. Now can you bring about the dialectical model? Now when you look into the lecture on a Marx, the dialectical materialism or historical materialism that we talked about, it means class is an irreconcilable category. I repeat, mind the line. Class is an irreconcilable category that cannot be reconciled. And why it is a irreconcilable category? It is an irreconcilable category on the basis of the contradictory relationship. And on the basis of this contradictory relationship, it will be finding a momentum. They will come opposite to one another, which will lead into the class conflict, the driving force of human history. The base of society is economic. They pick up the notion of infrastructure, superstructure. Those who control infrastructure, they extend their control to the superstructure as well. So there you are aware of infrastructure, superstructure perspective. The economically dominant class, to further its own interest, extends its control to the other institution as well. However, with the passage of time, the relations between the classes become exploitative. So the masters exploited slaves, the lords exploited serfs, and the bourgeois are exploiting the proletariat. It means exploitation is not a new phenomenon. And this exploitation in a human history is a purposive action. And if the history has been made by man, then any anomaly of history has to be rectified by the man as well. God is not going to transcend on earth. So if history is a make of man, then anomaly of history has also to be rectified by the man themselves. And thus, in this context, in a Marxian theory, we find about the importance of class conflict. And this class conflict is nothing but the corollary of historical materialism. Recall back your data from there. You begin with, give the just basics in terms of the primitive communism to the capitalist society, in which you find about the evolution of the Western society and the emergence of class from undifferentiated horde to the man of stratification, and within which you just give the passing reference in terms of the slave society, feudal society, and the capitalist society. And this capitalist, which you have talked about in a Marx, so I am not going deep into this one. Capitalism would be the last antagonistic modes of production. Since proletariat revolution would overthrow capitalism, will bring socialism and ultimately succeed in inaugurating communism, in which the class will disappear and ultimately the state will disappear. But yet another magnum opus, apart from Marx, in the sociology of social stratification has been of Max Weber. I always say Max Weber is the live ghost of Marx. Digging the grave of Marx, taking his skeleton and asking all the questions what Marx has not answered it. You could also look at Weber not only as a critic of Marx, but you could look Max Weber also as an extension of the Marxian theory. So the two magnum opuses on a stratification, the analysis of a stratification, sociology of social stratification, is a Karl Marx, just we talked about. And I asked you to recall back some from the thinkers which you talked about, and then the Max Weber. I mean, the moment you started going through the Max Weber, you came in terms of the first hand method, you also came in terms of the ideal type. And almost every work of Weber would include these two methods. Now, when you are looking at the Max Weber says to see property as a sole criterion of class is myopic. Now, here is coming about the critic of the Marx. That Marx who is looking at the property relation, Marx who is looking at the economic determinism. Now, Weber is saying that to see property as a sole criterion of class is a myopic one. And thus, Weber moves away from the Marxian analysis. Unlike the unidimensional economic dimension what the Marx has emphasized, Weber now moves towards the multidimensional analysis in a social stratification. Simply, to Weber, class is basically or primarily made of three components: property, prestige and power. Property, economy; prestige, social; power, political. And this way, the Trinity model of Weber in social stratification comes out, that is called class, status and a party. Once again I say, property, economic; prestige, social; power, political, which could be read as class, status and a party. And that way, the sociology of social stratification of Max Weber in the Trinity model could be analyzed by us. I just said that when we are dealing with the questions of the Weber, the themes which are there in the syllabus in a Weber, you must remember that even the analysis of class, like any other theme in a Weberian perspective, is based on the various categories of ideal type. A mental construct. But this this ideal type could basically be traced back to the acting individual with regard to social stratification. The moment you say it could be traced back to the acting individual, then you are basically talking about the Western method. Though like Marx, Weber does agree that class is based on a given objective economic criterion. Class is based on given objective economic criteria. But the way Marx has made social and political dimensions being enveloped by economy, encapsulated by economy, Weber separates it. And in this process of separation, in the process of analyzing its multidimensionality, he picks up the two other structural components, the concepts that is called status and a party. It means class is derived not only from control or lack of control on the means of production, but also on the economic differences, which has nothing to do with property, which may include skills, credentials, affecting the type of job people are able to obtain. It means to Marx, to Weber, one's class position is basically his market position. So on the basis of these skills, credentials, which affect the type of job the people would be obtaining. For example, the white collar professionals or the skilled blue collar workers. And that's why in a Weberian sociology, we'll find about the class analyzed in terms of the market situation. An individual's class position is his market position. The managers, the administrators, the bureaucrats receives higher reward because of their demand in the market. And thus Weber would hear, the moment you have come here, Weber, you just bring about the concept of a status. Lifestyle. The status group is distinguished in terms of positive and negative estimate of honor. If class is linked to the life chances, mind the line, the question is there. If the class is linked to the life chances, then the status is linked to the specific lifestyle expected from those who belong to this category. The shared mode of life is found in common education, prestige attached to the worth and also the family. Mind the line, beta. Status may be linked to class stereotype. But more often than not, Weber writes that more often than not, it stands in a sharp contrast to the pretension of property. It stands in a sharp contrast to the pretension of property. Now, apart from the caste and apart from the class and status, now Weber is picking up the party, yet another structural component to explain the stratification. It means party is a group of people who come together for common political purpose. It means if the class belongs to economic order, status to social order, then party reflects political order residing in the sphere of power. But it has having its capacity to influence both the class and status. It means in an economic analysis of Marx, social and political were hidden. They were basically encapsulated, they were basically enveloped. Weber is now separating economic, social and political from one another. And it's not merely in terms of the separation, he is also trying to look at the certain kind of overlapping. That's why I say that class can also reflect the status group. Or a status may be linked to the class stereotype, but there may not be certain relationship between them. They may be different from one another. And with this Trinity model of class, association and party, Weber is now basically picking up the certain kind of combinations to look at in a social stratification. The certain kind of novelty he brings about in the analysis of social stratification, what was somewhere missing in a Marxian analysis of social stratification. That's why I said either you can look at his extension or a critic. But let me say, and then I will not hesitate saying this one, that when looking at the contemporary sociology of education or social stratification, somehow or other, every contemporary sociologist seems to be either influenced by Marxian analysis or by Weberian analysis. They choose their sides in terms of the Marxian and a Weberian perspective. However, the two works in which we find about the combination of Marx and Weber, one is by Eric Olin Wright, the contradictory class locations, that is the concept which is provided. And another work is by Frank Parkin, the social closure. Same dimensions will be basis of the social closure. Exclusion, usurpation, such kind of concepts will be coming out. It means in the most of the Western perspective, Western sociology, the moment they started looking at the social stratification, the perspective of class became the more important one. Broadly, when you have started going through in the basics, then you find about race, state system, caste and class as the types of social stratification. Racism is gone. With the decline of feudalism, state system is gone. So in the contemporary perspective, the two types of social stratification, which seems to be the most significant one in practice, is a class and a caste. So if they ask you the questions on a class, then in a Western perspective, how that class has been the most important perspective, that way in a mobility you will be talking about the difference between class and a caste. But when you talk about the characteristics of the Indian society, one of the base of social stratification, or the base of social stratification in India, has been put in terms of the caste system. That way, class versus caste, that debate, open versus closed system, that debate has taken place. So apart from Marx, Weber, Eric Olin Wright, Frank Parkin, Warner, these are the certain kind of works through which the class analysis could be looked at. But let me say that when we talked about the social stratification right from the institutionalized inequality, we found about the differences. We placed the debate in terms of the exclusion, we placed the debate in terms of equality, inequality, unstratified, stratified. We picked up the certain theoretical methodological stance to look at in terms of Talcott Parsons, Davison Moore, Melvin Tumin, Marx, Weber, and a contemporary perspective. It is to basically realize, it is basically to understand that social stratification is an important thing. Agreed. On the basis of the social stratification, a group of people in society are ranked one above another. They are differentiated from one another. Fine. Every organized society has this institutionalized inequality, on the basis of which the group of people seems to be ranked one above the another in a hierarchy. A sphere of competence in terms of hierarchy comes out. They will be raising the debate between stratification and hierarchy in terms of the two scholars, Indian scholars, or in Indian sociology. Louis Dumont bringing about the exterior perspective, and Andre Bethe. That question has been there. We will be picking up that in terms of caste. But in every society, or the society which basically differentiates its people, ranks its people on the basis of certain social parameters, one above the another, the same society also provides avenues to its members to move up down the ladder. And that's why I always say that stratification becomes functional in relation to mobility present in a society. The parameters on the basis of which the society has produced social stratification, the institutionalized structural inequality, it is the same parameter on which the movement of the people could be witnessed. And once you are focusing on this movement of people on the basis of the same parameter, then the perspective of the social mobility would be coming in, the stratification and mobility. Ethnicity and race I will be talking about. When on the basis of the biological endowments we divide the group of people, it's a racial one. And on the basis of the social, origin, religion, culture you define the group of people, it will be ethnicity. Caste and class would be talked by us. We are basically talking about the social stratification and mobility. And I repeat once again that the social parameters on the basis of which the society practices ranking the members of the society on the same social parameters, you will be finding about that society is providing the avenues for the people to move up and down the ladder. It is providing the avenues of movement. And social mobility, social stratification would become functional in relation to the social mobility present in it. Simply social mobility reflects movement from one status to another, from one position to another. In that ranked hierarchy, the same social parameters, what you have picked up in terms of social stratification, the same social parameters you will be picking up in your answers to reflect the perspective of social mobility. It is the movement of the people on the same parameters of social inequality on the basis of which stratification has been there, is practiced in a society. And thus when the people are having their movement on the basis of the same parameters, we are witnessing some dimensions of change in their positions. The social mobility is basically a movement of individual, families or groups from one social position signifying a certain rank, that is possession of goods, wealth, esteem, privilege, prestige desired by most members of the society. And thus, all those sociologists who turn their attentions to the study of or analysis of social mobility, they also link this type of mobility, or this also link the social mobility to the types of social stratification. And within these types of social stratification in contemporary times, if you allow me to use the word dichotomy, and then we are talking about how we have to view the class and caste, this dichotomy between class versus caste in terms of open versus closed system. If the open system was linked to the class, where the nature of a status is achieved and the rate of mobility is higher, then caste system, which was attributed to be the feature of Indian society, was viewed as a closed system in which the status is determined on the basis of ascription. It means ascriptive status by birth. And the rate and degree of change was considered to be very less or almost negligible. It is either closed either absent or relatively very low in relation to the class. Thus, in compared to the Western society, Indian society was perceived as a closed or a static system. So, the Western society, which was characterized by the open system, it was said that the personal ambition of the people is always encouraged to move up the ladder. It also implies that when a personal ambition of the people are encouraged to move up, it means the position of the individual is not fixed in the category of his birth. However, in the caste system it was said that everyone would be frozen in the category of his birth, professing the same occupation of his forefather. But let me say quote the two scholars. Robertson, while analyzing the British society, he says, what is the best way to become rich? Don't think much. He says the best way to become rich is to get birth in a rich family. And you might be aware of that moment you are looking at the works of M.N. Srinivasam, the cooks of Karnataka. The concept Sanskritization is developed, reflecting the perspective of cultural limitation built in the structure of caste. I am not picking the definition of that one. I am simply saying that stratification is conceptually a cultural limitation by the lower caste in the structure of a caste. Then how the lower caste, by adopting the behavior or practices of the upper caste, tries to move up the ladder in the structure of caste to improve his position. That we will talking about when we talk about the caste. But here, what is the stratification? One line, cultural limitation built in the structure of caste. And through this very concept of Sanskritization, which is the source, orthogenetic source of change, coming from within, Srinivas demystifies the static nature of the Indian society as projected by the Western scholars. The Indian society or the caste system where the mobility is absent or relatively very low, that is now demystifies. That even the social stratification of caste is providing its avenues to the members to improve their positions in the caste hierarchy, which we are considering to be static, which you have labeled it to be the closed system. Sanskritization is a change in the system. It is a positional change from one position to another. It means, let me say this line. When the question comes on open versus closed, remember this line here. The difference between open versus closed is not of a kind, but the difference between open versus closed is of a degree. And when you come to the contemporary times, because you will have to use that one, the application has to be looked. When you look at the contemporary modern societies, almost everywhere, we find about that how the modern nation has deliberately increased the rate and degree of mobility. With this promise, with this optimism, that it will motivate people, which will not only make them to improve their positions, but also to indulge in the kind of occupation of their choice. They would not be frozen in the category of their forefathers, but but rather people would be associated with the kind of occupation, kind of job which they like, of their own choice, and they are capable of. Presence of mobility would also ensure that this unequal origin of birth could be rectified. Today, the way the democratic notion of governance has come out, so almost in every democracy, equal opportunity is provided to ensure that people will not be remain frozen in the status of their birth. But let me not forget to say this line. That the more the rate of mobility in society, more the fear of downfall as well. It means somewhere of it they ask the questions in terms of the penalties associated with the mobility. It means we are talking about the mobility. You also need to open up this dimension of the penalties associated with the mobility. Implying that if the degree of mobility is high, then the fear of falling down is also very high. Sometimes due to the fear of loss of social relationship, people may not attach themselves to the mobility. And if I pick up the Marxian perspective, then if the rate of mobility is higher, then the possibility of development of class consciousness ultimately leading to the class conflict will decrease. And if the society in terms of the mobility, in terms of providing the opportunities, has set a goal and has set a means, but if does not provide the equal accessibility to the goals and means, then you please use Merton's perspective of the deviance in terms of the conformity, innovation, ritualism, relativism and innovation. These we will be talking about in terms of the penalties associated with the mobility. And if I could use Anthony Giddens, then he basically says that social mobility is basically the movement of people and groups in a different socio-economic positions. However, might be aware of that at a very early time, in social stratification, the work of Prithim Sorkin seems to be the most significant one. Who looks or who views social mobility as a shifting of people in the social space. And when you talk about views shifting of people in the social space, then he also talks about the mobility in terms of direction, time span and a content. And with which the types of mobility will be coming out. You might be aware of this one. This is the unit which everyone is aware of. So when we talk about the direction, vertical and horizontal mobility, vertical upward, vertical downward. It means when you are talking about the vertical mobility, you will be talking about the vertical upward and vertical downward. In upward, the mobility is from lower to the upper, and in downward, the movement is from upper to the lower. For example, today you are a resident, tomorrow you will be selected as an IS. It's a vertical upward mobility. To say if the supervisor of a factory is promoted as a manager, is an upward vertical mobility. Similarly, if the manager has been demoted as a supervisor, that is a vertical downward mobility. Which may be related to the movement from one place to another. But mobility has not to be confused with a migration. And once you have talked about the horizontal mobility, then you talk about the vertical mobility, then talk about the horizontal mobility. It's basically a movement, but there is no change in the status. A worker shifting from one factory to another as a worker. No change has come, neither in terms of status, nor in terms of wealth, nor in terms of any other thing. So horizontal mobility is reflecting a movement without change in the status. Sociologically, if I could get one another example, the people who are lawyers, their fathers were doctors and their sons are lawyers. It means we are talking about lawyers, father being a doctor, son being a lawyer, is also an example of horizontal mobility, provided the society has not differentiated between the positions of lawyer and a doctor. When you are looking at Sorokin in terms of a time span, then the two other mobility would be, types of mobility would be coming out, that is called inter and intra-generational. Inter is between generations. Intra is within generation. So when you talk about inter, you can compare the father with the son, take the example, mother with the daughter, with which the inflow outflow table will be coming out. And intra, which is also called the career mobility. So the same example which I have given, that mobility within the two span of a time. So if intergenerational mobility is measured between the two generations, then intragenerational mobility is basically measured in the two time span of an individual. However, you need to remember this line. However, you need to remember that in both these inter and intra, the combination of vertical, upward, downward, horizontal mobility, that combination could also be witnessed, that combination could also be found. It means we are talking about the types, then vertical, horizontal, inter and intra. Apart from this, in some of the sociological works, two or few other types have also been analyzed. For example, structural and circulational mobility. For example, if there occurs a change in the structure of occupation in a society, and if the people moves into that, then it is a structural mobility. But if there is no change in the structure of occupation of the society, then the people will move from one position to another, that circulation would be there. If somebody will be going up, then somebody will be coming down. This is called circulational mobility. What you need to remember? Change in the structure of occupation of society. If there is a change in the structure of occupation, which we are witnessing now in the contemporary times, that how the new kind of jobs, occupations have emerged out. If that structure is not changing, then we are talking about the circulational one. Apart from this structural and circulational mobility, in some of the sociological writings, the sponsored versus contested mobility was also picked up. You might have heard the sentence. When you say that he could have been frozen in the category unless and until his talent was found by someone. It means the person would or individual remain to be frozen in the category of his forefathers unless his talent or exceptional quality has been witnessed by someone and the door of opportunity has been opened. This is called a sponsored mobility. However, it was also argued that such kind of talent, exceptional qualities could be found in some other individual as well. But since his talent, his exceptional quality has not been witnessed, not been found by anyone, so the door of mobility has not been opened. The sponsored mobility would basically be entailing inequality, not providing the equal opportunity to all. And thus, opposite to this sponsored in the mobility, yet another type that was talked about is this contested mobility, that let everyone contest with one another. Whosoever will be found the meritorious will get the avenues to move up the ladder. So in terms of the types, you talk about vertical, horizontal, intra, inter-intra, and just mention that how in some of the sociological works a structural, circulational, a sponsored and contested mobility has been found out. But not only the types of mobility, you will be finding about the question on stratification and mobility. And a major part of the questions are there in terms of open versus closed, which I once again saying that the difference between open versus closed is not of a kind but of a degree. And that way I quoted Robertson, I quoted M.N. Srinivas, which you are aware of. So you will be finding about the closeness in an open system, you will be finding about the openness in a closed system. And that way the Weberian ideal type has to be talked about. It does not seem to be the too pure kind of one. We will be finding about the certain mixture, certain overlapping into this one. And that way the ideal type, you can also use the Weberian ideal type by applying this in your answer. And open versus closed you talked about. Sometimes the penalties which I talked about. So this is basically the unit on which you have to talk about. And somewhere we will be talking about the race, ethnicity, caste and status we will be talking about. When you come to the system of kins, we will be talking about the gender. The moment we will be making the difference between sex versus gender, we will be talking about the certain dimensions of gender. Because I am witnessing the questions in terms of feminism, the patriarchy, the entitlement, sexual division of labor. So that we will be talking about seed and earth. That question was there in terms of Leela Dubey. Alright. So that way the moment we are looking at that, this is the perspective. But I do request that when you are reading this one, then do not develop the concepts in segmentalized one, in a separation. Your understanding of social stratification is holistic. And in this holistic, one by one, in a structured perspective, try to develop the concepts. That's why I said, once again I am saying, that when you are talking about the concepts, we talked about equality, inequality, unstratified, stratified, hierarchy, poverty and exclusion, that would also be talking about. And then with the dimensions which have come out. But when you divide that, you define that in terms of institutionalized structural inequality, raise the debate between equality and inequality, talk about the debate at the same time in terms of a stratified, unstratified society, bring about the sphere of competence, that way you will be finding about the hierarchy. You will also be talking about that hierarchy in terms of Louis Dumo, homo hierarchicus in a caste system. So hierarchy versus the stratification, that debate will be coming out between Dumo and Andre Bete. In a caste system we will be talking about. So that way you place this one and then link stratification with the mobility, talk about the penalties associated with the mobility and types of mobility. But look at this mobility within the same parameters on which you have talked about the social stratification. Right? Tomorrow we will pick up economy. It's a small unit. So it will not be taking much time.